Hey, Daily Dosers, it's Wednesday. Welcome. So glad you could tune in. Hey, do you remember if you were fortunate enough to have kids, when your kids would say the M word, mine? Hey, we adults do the same thing. It's just a little more subtle. We're going to talk about greed today as we continue our series on the enemies of the heart. But before we do, would you do this for me? If you're watching on Facebook, would you like this post? Would you share it on your own Facebook page? Let's get the word out. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit the bell so you get notifications. And if you're watching at home on TV, would you share this with somebody else? Would you let them know about the Daily Dose? Hey, I want to talk today about greed, because greed is one of those enemies of the heart that gets lodged in our heart and wreaks all kinds of damage in our lives. Greed says to us, I owe me. I deserve everything. I deserve everything that could come my way. But here's what I know about greed. Greed is one of those enemies that's a little different than the other enemies that we're going to be talking about this week in this series, because greed has this way of disguising itself. I mean, let's be honest. Nobody says, I'm greedy. Yep, I'm a greedy person. No, that never happens. We say things like this. We say, I'm a saver. Or we say things like, I'm conservative with my money. Or we might say, I'm careful with my resources, with my dollars. But here's the thing. Greed may be this thing that's easy for us to hide from ourselves, but it's not for others, isn't it? I mean, we can spot greed a mile away. We see it in people who talk a lot about money, or they worry a lot about money. We all know people who struggle to be cheerful givers. They squabble in their families over money. They don't express gratitude nearly as often as we think they probably could. And they value stuff over people. But none of us, let's be honest, would say, yep, that's me, I'm greedy. You see, the irony with greed is that it isn't a financial issue at all. I mean, you and me know that. We know that the more money you have, it's not going to take away greed. That's because greed is an issue of the heart. It gets lodged in our heart, but it's a subtle one. And Jesus knew this because in Luke chapter 12, he writes these words. Then he said to them, to those around him, watch out. Be on guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. He said that we need to be on guard because greed, it's a subtle thing. You see, behind greed is fear. And if there's one thing we hear in the Bible again and again, it's that God said to God's people, fear not. More than anything else in the Bible, the authors write, fear not. But behind greed is this fear that there is not going to be enough for me. I once worked at a church, and that church, when I got there, I realized that they had been storing up cash reserves. They had, get this, over $500,000 sitting in a savings account at that church. And the son of the pastor, somehow he found out that they had $500,000 sitting in a savings account. And do you know what he said to his dad? He looked at his dad and said, Dad, what are they using that money for? And his dad said, well, it's just sitting there right now. And this little boy, 9-year-old boy, looked at his dad, the pastor of that church, and said, Dad, why don't they just give it away? There's people that need that money, huh? See, that's the interesting thing about greed, is it causes us to store up because we're afraid. We're afraid. But here's the thing, the more we acquire, we think that it's going to provide us a sense of security. The problem is, and you know this, it's never enough. It's never enough. And consequently, people who struggle with greed, because they value stuff over people, because they are preoccupied constantly with filling their garages and their homes with stuff, they almost always have issues with relationships. They rarely have peace in the relationships they share with the people they love the most. In the book of Luke chapter 12, there's this great story about this farmer who had a bumper crop. He had a crazy bumper crop. And the people who would have read that originally, that agricultural society, they would have recognized something right away, that man had a bumper crop not because he was such a great farmer. He had a bumper crop because God provided. God provided healthy soil. God provided just enough days of sunlight and just enough days of cloudy skies, just enough rain. But that man, he thought, this is mine. I deserve this. This is all of my own doing. And when he was contemplating, what do I do with all that I've harvested, the author seems to suggest that there is a natural response he should have had. That he should have looked to God and said, God, what do I do with the extra? What do I do with the extra? But instead, we read in chapter 12 that this man took a different turn. Then he said this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns. I have all this extra crop, and I'll build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus of grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. Rather than asking, God, what should I do with the extra? He just simply builds bigger barns. Don't we do that too? One of the leading industries in the U.S. right now is storage garages. We see that all over town because we fill our basements, and once we fill our basements, we fill our garages, and once our garages are full, we get a shed in the backyard, you know this, and once that's full, what do? We rent a storage garage. We build bigger barns. But here's what happened to that man. That very day he made that declaration, he found out something. He found out that he was going to die sometime that night. You see, he found out that he was going to run out of time before he ran out of stuff. Eventually, it says this, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? You see, what I think Jesus was saying to him is that everything we own will ultimately be owned by someone else. By someone else. So what do we do about greed? It's this subtle enemy of the heart that, if we're honest, affects every one of us, but none of us want to admit it. Well, there's a really simple remedy, and that's generosity. It's generosity. There is nothing else in this world that will combat greed except generosity. When rather than saying, why don't I have enough, we muster up the courage to say, why do I have so much? And rather than building bigger barns to store up more stuff because we're afraid that one day we won't have enough, we ask the question, what does God want me to do with the extra in my life? So a couple questions for you, friends. Questions that I'm wrestling with myself. Why do I have so much? Let's turn the tables. Not why don't I have enough, but why do I have so much? And the second question would be this. What do you think God wants us to do with our extra?
Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song. You are good, good. Oh,
never gonna let me down. You're 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 never gonna let me down. You are good, good. Oh, you are good, good. Oh, you are good, good. Oh, you are good,
When the night is holding on to me, God is holding on. When the night is holding on to me, God is holding on.